The budget process is underway, but what will it mean for education funding? I'm Jill Horner. This is Comcast Newsmakers. With me is Pennsylvania State Representative Todd Stephens. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the budget process and what's currently happening, let's talk about a new law in Pennsylvania. The primaries were a dry run, if you will, related to voter identification. But for the general election, everyone will have to show photo identification with an expiration date. What will this mean for voters in Pennsylvania?
You know, there's been much said about this subject in recent months as we passed this bill, and I have to tell you, the feedback from my constituents has really been, this has been much ado about nothing. Over 99% of Pennsylvania residents have a photo ID from the state, so we're talking a very small percentage of folks, and shows like this today and all the media coverage over the past several months, I think really have lent to an awareness. There's not going to be any surprises for anybody in November, and we did build in safeguards. Even if you show up in November's election without your photo ID, you'll be able to cast a provisional ballot, and then within 6 days you'll need to get a copy of your photo ID either in person, via fax, or via email, or regular mail, over to the county courthouse. So nobody's going to be turned away from the polls. Everybody will be able to cast their vote. And really this is just to safeguard our democracy. There was rampant fraud that we saw. Your viewers can just go ahead and Google Joseph Cheeseborough, Philadelphia, and they'll come up with a litany of stories about how there were several Joseph Cheeseboroughs, some spelled B-O-R-O-U-G-H, B-O-R-O, one at a vacant lot, one where there was a convenience store, and they were never able to identify that individual as even existing, so they were removed from the voter rolls, and that's a recent example.
So if people don't at this point have photo identification where they would be able to vote, people who are legitimate voters who could legitimately vote in their districts, talk to us about how they actually can get voter identification. Can they contact your office, for example?
Absolutely, and we've done a lot of outreach to make sure our constituents were aware of this. I have several senior centers in my legislative district. I've met with them, and we've developed a plan to make sure that everybody there has the ID. If you contact my office, the phone number will be on the screen here in a little bit, and we'll get you a free ID if you need one to vote. That's the one thing that we also included in the bill, is there's no fee for this photo ID if it's required to vote, and we'll take care of that for you. You'll have it in in no time.
And I want to quickly get to the budget. You are in that process at this point. Let's talk about higher education. This was one of the headlines in the budget process. Last year, the governor has called for additional cuts for higher education and some for basic ed funding as well. Talk to us about where we stand in the budget process right now when it comes to cuts for higher ed and what this could potentially mean for state schools and state relateds. Well,
when the budget was unveiled by the governor a few months ago, the revenues that we were experiencing were about $750 million behind what we expected to see by the end of the year. And as a result, he had to make some pretty drastic cuts in his proposal to higher education, basic education. Just like last year, we in the House of Representatives are focused on restoring that money to higher education and basic education. I mean, in this area, education is so important to our constituents. I mean, so many of our students from high school go on to either state schools or state-related schools right here in Pennsylvania, and we want to keep them here. And that, of course, means when they graduate, they remain in Pennsylvania and have jobs and raise their families here and continue on. So we're doing everything we can to restore that funding. I know the last couple of months we've seen an uptick in the revenues, so we're crossing our fingers and hoping that we're once again going to be able to restore as much of that funding as possible to help our students.
And we just have a short time left, but what about human service funding? Will that be a priority as well?
Absolutely. There's absolutely no way we can balance our budget on the backs of those who are most vulnerable. And those with intellectual disabilities and those truly struggling to get by can't be the ones that bear the brunt of this. So we're going to work to restore that funding as well.
Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We've been talking with Pennsylvania State Representative Todd Stephens. I'm Jill Horner.